Hi, good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Dylan, Jessica, Adam, Ethan and Lucy, and to Rita in the United States. This is the second chapter of The Lost Cactus. Chapter 2, Quiz Night at the Dog and Duck. Daniel arrived at work and switched off the engine to his car, yet how he had been conveyed he couldn't recall. Somehow, between parking and turning the key in the ignition, the memory of his commute had been erased by a reprise of the previous night's dream. Daniel focused on his surroundings. Looking through the windscreen, he discovered that the disturbing picture of a talking cactus was now etched into his subconscious. He rubbed his eyes and shook his head before looking up at the offices of Global Management Inc. and sighing. In front of Daniel towered the mass of glass and steel that had encapsulated his short working life. A huge block of mirrors set on the outskirts of town with rolling countryside beyond and not much more. After rubbing his eyes a second time, he peered upwards, acknowledging the scene with a profound lack of excitement and realising that, with any less enthusiasm, he might have questioned the building's existence altogether. Before him, openly defining his mood, the building shone back happily on the grey autumnal morning. Sighing, Daniel exited his car and ignored the gleeful structure before solemnly walking up the steps towards the revolving glass doors and marble foyer. His head downturned, his right hand holding a soggy music magazine, his mind whirring with the ranting of a small talking plant. Unseen, just to his rear, just a few yards from where Daniel had parked his car, a cat saw a rope-like object dangling enticingly from a large pine and, feeling rather bold that morning, launched an attack. Instantly, the head of a king cobra swept downwards on the unsuspecting cat and sunk two fangs into the cat's neck, killing it at once. Like a streamlined brick, the pet dropped back to earth with terror frozen onto its face and its wide, dead eyes staring up at the morning sun breaking through the grey September clouds. Nearby, two suited men observed the event with barely concealed amusement upon their faces and ambled over to the tree. The taller of the two, thin with a scar running down his left cheek, kicked the cat out of the way and looked upwards. Slowly, a huge king cobra's head lowered from the branches and stopped just shy of the man's ear. His companion, a short podgy man with small, beady eyes, glanced around nervously, obviously afraid of being observed, and stood watch as the snake's head hovered briefly next to the tall man's ear. Without a noise, it disappeared back into the tree. "What did it say?" a shaking Cockney accent asked. The tall, scarred man replied in a similar brogue, pointing towards the office block. "That's him. That's the Guardian." Two beady eyes widened. His face filled with awe and confusion, and looked at where Daniel had entered the office complex. Him? But he didn't look very dangerous. "I know, but that's him." The taller man looked as puzzled as his colleague. He also said where to get the item tonight. He gestured at the tree and then continued. "Snakey and his twin will take care of the Guardian. Work to get the item from his office," he indicated, gesturing toward Daniel. "It arrives later this morning." The shorter man quivered as he looked back at the tree, checking to make sure that the cobra hadn't re-emerged. "Let's get out of here. Those two give me the creeps. Where is the other one, by the way?" The taller man shrugged. "Watching the flat?" The two walked back to their car and sat in quiet vigil. From the tree, a huge king cobra lowered itself to the ground and then withdrew, a feline breakfast enclosed within its mouth. Unaware of the early morning fatality, Daniel walked into the lobby, centred on a wooden reception desk and a stainless steel staircase that swirled upwards towards a mezzanine cafe. Behind it, at the rear of the lobby, glass elevators were positioned to lift people towards their open floor plan offices. High above, great sets of modernist chandeliers hung from the pine ceiling and lit the area with a white light that seemed to say, "Welcome to the world's most efficient company. You will do well here, and your business is important to us." Daniel appraised the lights and smiled. "Damn, those energy-efficient light bulbs are good. What's that, Danny?" Daniel squinted to focus his blurred vision on the wooden reception desk. "Morning, Danny. Beautiful day, isn't it?" As his eyes refocused, he saw Ray, the security guard, beaming at him from behind the desk, the smile crooked yet friendly, the eyes innocent and not overly bright. The pristine uniform reminded Daniel of his uni landlord, the man who had always seemed impeccably dressed, even when weeding his garden. From the beginning, Daniel's unironed, wrinkled student garb had placed them at odds. The man had taken great pains to point out how the youth of today would probably burn their faces if someone had phoned them while they were ironing. Daniel reflected briefly how it hadn't been one of the easiest relationships. "You okay, Danny?" He shook the thought away and concentrated on the waiting security guard. Yeah, Ray. It's a beautiful morning. I see you've stopped someone from nicking the building again. There's no chance you couldn't let him have it," he quizzed playfully. "Oh no, we'd be fine for that, Danny," Ray replied with shock in his voice, a smile disappearing before being replaced with a forced grimace. "Are you kidding? I get it. Nice one, Danny. Nice one." Ray looked at him suspiciously, then at his colleague for reassurance. Ray's companion looked up from his game of solitaire and shook his head. "He's an idiot," he stated darkly. "Just ignore him." Ray's colleague finished by spitting a piece of chewing gum into the bin and returning to his game. Unaware, Daniel strolled to the elevator with a smile on his face and, with the up button pressed, stood waiting for the majestic glass lift to descend from its lofty position. The lift arrived and he pressed the button for the third floor. "Floor 3, going up," the elevator announced cheerfully in an American twang. Without responding, Daniel stood quietly as the doors closed. A few seconds later, the reception area began to fall away. "Floor 3, have a nice day," the lift called out in eternal happiness, the doors opening. Daniel shook his head, exiting without saying goodbye. Behind him, the happy conveyance left to transport another victim of enforced sleep. But forgetting the lift the second his back was turned, Daniel walked to his office through the massive open floor plan workspace of the third floor. The entire area was filled with cubicle after cubicle, each furnished with a chair. The accompanying computer workstations adorned with pictures of snowboarding holidays or snapshots of pets. On the various desks stood stale coffee mugs that had been abandoned next to highlighter pens and staplers. But Daniel did not notice these trifles as he walked a similar path he had trodden for the past 3 years. As he ambled past, he reflected how it had been just a month since his recent surprise promotion. It had been just 31 days since he had attained the office employee's top prize. A single office with real walls, a window to the outside world, and, most sought after of all, a secretary. While he recalled the surprise interview with his boss that resulted in his promotion, he reached his office. He smiled at its novelty. With the filing cabinet on the far wall and a fake mahogany desk providing the centrepiece to the otherwise bland room, he felt at home, safe in his magnolia box. As the stress of the night fell from him, he sat behind the desk and placed his accessories down in their usual places. The coffee cup he placed 1 foot to the right, his rucksack on the floor to the left beside the bin. And his soggy music magazine he placed in the centre of the desk. Satisfied, he leaned backwards and pushed his long floppy hair away from his face. As the noise increased with the arrival of the masses, he closed his eyes. With his eyelids closed, the image of a talking cactus filled his vision. The small plant shook uncontrollably as it tried in vain to communicate with Daniel, who attempted to dispel the image. But the shrub was resolute. It needed something from him and wasn't going to disappear until it got on what it came for. Desperately, he tried to think of something else. He attempted to remember the face of his lost fiancée, Aradia. He pictured her lying in bed next to him, but when he looked at her arms, he saw they were covered in needles and that she'd become a huge cacti. Flushing the image away into the drainage of the mind, he quickly tried to think of being elsewhere, anywhere, but the plant held sway over his consciousness, and lying on the beach next to a distraught plant made him more irate. Cursing, Daniel opened his eyes in surrender as the small plant threw up 2 of its leaves in a rude gesture. In the blurring image, he saw the door to his office open and the cactus silently morphed into a suited woman. Daniel blinked at the new apparition and rubbed his bleary eyes again. Standing in front of him and staring with a raised eyebrow was his secretary, Mrs. Rosemary Littlebottom. She stood with her hands on her hips and appraised him. Sitting up straight, welcoming the intrusion, he smiled in greeting and thought of how she reminded him of his biology teacher from secondary school, in her mid-50s, wearing half-moon glasses that balanced on the tip of her nose, and always smiling. "What's this then, Rosemary?" Daniel indicated towards the piece of paper she was holding. He had called her Littlebottom once and, after the ensuing tirade, had vowed never to do so again. She held out a memo towards him and smiled. "Good morning, Daniel. I'm glad to see you looking so well." He pointed to the memo with a questioning raised eyebrow. "Just sign it, please, Master Howard," she said. She always referred to him as Master Howard when irked. "It's from the suits, and I know you don't really care what's written in it." "You're absolutely right. I have no compunction to find out what drivel the suits are pushing today," he confirmed with a laugh. Rosemary gave him a playful look of reproach while he signed and then left the room, closing the door silently behind her. He wasn't concerned about what he was signing for. It could have been death warrants for all he knew, but he signed anyway. Daniel sat back and opened his music magazine before placing it back on the table. Was it Rosemary's willingness to work that kept him in his job at Global Management Inc.? Yes. He laughed quietly to himself, happy with his fortune, and picked up the music rag, and then placed it back down. Was that a good thing? Daniel didn't know. Okay, it wasn't that he despised his job. He didn't like it for sure, but he did it to the best of his ability and without complaint. Throughout the day, he processed the paperwork that flowed through his in-tray and, after Rosemary had shown him his mistakes, he reprocessed it all again. To put it simply, his job was simple, but it was just enough to pay all the bills. So he should have been happy with his lot. But he wasn't. He was deeply unhappy with his lot. The problem was he was bored. In fact, it was worse than being bored. He was totally mind-numbingly, nerve-mollifyingly, brain-stupefyingly bored out of his 23-year-old mind. His job had no excitement to it, and, if he was to be totally honest, he really didn't understand what went on at Global Management Inc. Daniel, after 3 years, had yet to figure out what the company actually did. All he did know, and it wasn't much, was that Global Management Inc. would teach managers from other companies how to improve themselves, and he was pretty sure it was his job to set up the courses for them to attend. After his part of the process had been acted upon, the managers were handed over to what he called the suits. These strange, soulless creatures would then baffle the poor trainees by using as much business jargon as possible. What the purpose of this whole exercise was, he simply didn't know. Daniel was sure that the companies would be better off using the money to become more economical, and he'd even once suggested this to his colleagues. But as he'd begun speaking, the suits had rounded on him with hostile faces. After breathing in deeply, he continued, blurting his idea out in the hope that someone would see his brilliance. We could have a green division. We'd save the planet and, at the same time, save our clients money and, oh crap. Donald Smith Peterson had interrupted him. The smug little suit had held up his hand and laughed in his face. "Oh, Daniel, I can see why you are where you are. I now understand why you didn't even finish the first year of university. All I can say is thank God for Rosemary, who would have no courses to instruct and no jobs to come to work for." Around him, Donald Smith Peterson had received sportive laughter from the fellow suits, and Daniel had been forced to pretend he'd been joking. Placing his music magazine to one side, Daniel contemplated his memory of that day and felt the anger surge inside him. Not liking the feeling one bit, he breathed in deeply, allowed the aggression to dissipate, and began his work as he pushed the memory to the deep recesses of his mind. With anger replaced by embarrassment, he laboured slowly through his work, plodding through the mountain of trivia that his computer pinged into his inbox. Before him, the machine hummed contentedly as it provided an seemingly endless source of inane tasks for the unfortunate user. A half hour later, Daniel was diligently thinking of nothing as he plodded through the monotonous onslaught when he looked up with surprise after a knock at the door announced the arrival of a delivery man. He had a parcel. Quickly, Daniel's mind leapt back from where it had been hiding and forced his mouth into conversation. "Is that for me?" No. It was Rosemary who'd answered, stepping into view from behind the door. Daniel saw her hush the delivery man when he indicated the document on the top of the box. Confused, the delivery man looked at Daniel for guidance. "Just do as you're told, young man, and don't go interrupting Master Howard. He's a very busy man," Rosemary interjected, pointing the delivery man towards the corner of the office. "Put it over there." Bewildered by the secretary's reaction, The delivery man shrugged his shoulders at an equally confused Daniel and then placed the package in the corner as ordered. As he left, Rosemary turned to follow. "Rosemary, what's in the box?" asked Daniel, bewilderment evident in his voice. "Never you mind, Master Howard." Without waiting for his response, Rosemary closed the door and left the mysterious box behind. Daniel was both shocked and intrigued. What had just happened? "Who in the hell's the boss in this office?" he questioned the door, but answered it himself. "It's Rosemary." Ah, crap. Daniel sat in his chair with his hands under his chin and stared at the box. Annoyingly, it moved. "What the hell?" He leapt from his seat, shoving the chair out of the way and pushing himself flat against the wall in case something should emerge from the cardboard innards. Nothing did. Daniel waited just to be sure. The box remained still, just a few feet away, yet Daniel felt it was silently appraising him. Daniel did the same to the box. It was ordinary looking, about a foot square and taped shut with a dispatch note on the top. He peered at the sides. No breathing holes were evident for whatever monster lay within. No sound emanated from inside of the cardboard presence. Had he imagined that it moved? Maybe he had. Maybe his lack of sleep was beginning to affect his eyesight, or maybe he was just jittery from the images that constantly flooded his vision. Either way, he had to do something. The box was in the corner nearest the door, and a growling feeling that the last cup of coffee was vying to escape. Slowly he edged forward, towards a silent watcher in the corner, careful not to rush the box in case he should startle it into attacking. When he got within 3 feet, he paused, listening for movement. Nothing. "This is one cool customer," he whispered to himself. Then, seizing the moment, he shot forward before the box could defend itself and kicked it. Without wanting to push his luck, Daniel ran back behind the desk before the boss reacted. Slowly he appeared over the fake mahogany desk. In the corner, the cardboard nemesis remained deathly still and surveyed him. Damn, but this box is a really cool customer. Daniel wondered if he could make it out of the office before it got its breath back. He doubted it. He needed to finish his appointment, and he needed to do it now. Daniel breathed in deeply, never taking his eyes from the corner of the room, and then sprinted out from behind the desk and dove on the office intruder. It had not sensed the attack and was taken completely unawares. Before it could respond, Daniel grasped the box, wrestled it into submission, and laughed out loud at his heroic act against the cardboard monster in his office. "That'll teach you to take on the mighty Daniel Howard," he giggled some more, and then sighed as he realised that his morning fun was coming to an end. "Let's have a look at you then." Daniel picked up the box and felt the weight. It shifted and he realised there was a solid object inside. Looking at the top, he could see the easiest way in, a small gap in the tape that held the lid in place. He used his nails to pry the gap wider before he glanced inside. A cactus! Daniel blinked. Before he could study the prickly shrub, it began to shy away from him and then morphed into nothing. Daniel rubbed his eyes. The box was empty. Okay. Starting to see cacti a bit too often. Daniel trailed off. Had he imagined the plant? He felt the box a second time. It was now as light as a feather. Had he imagined the weight as well? But then why hadn't the delivery man sensed the lack of weight? Confused, Daniel closed the lid and placed the box back down, rubbing his chin as he thought through the puzzle. Why would someone send me an empty box? He lifted the box a second time and his mouth fell open. It was heavy again. What's this thing made of? Daniel inspected the box anew. It was cardboard, plain and simple. He began to open it a second time. Then, without warning, a chill swept through him and he shivered briefly. Daniel realised he really didn't like the box. Quickly he placed it back in the corner and tried his best to reseal it. Satisfied with his pathetic efforts, he hastily sat back on his chair and pondered the conundrum, rubbing his chin anew for good measure. But in his stomach he felt a growing feeling of discomfort. Something was wrong at Global Management Inc. He didn't know what, but something was not right. As the feeling in his stomach intensified, Daniel realised what it was. The coffee was still trying desperately to escape. Without further thought of the box, Daniel rushed from his office, past his startled secretary, and, with a slight waddle, walked very quickly to the bathroom. On his return, Rosemary stood framed in the doorway with her arms crossed and looked at him over the rim of her glasses. Briefly, he wondered if he'd done his biology homework, and brushed the thought aside as it occurred to him that he should ask Rosemary what the box contained. However, as he started to ask, she cut him off. "Master Howard," she waited for him to see the full expression on her face and then continued, "if you could please leave my package alone, then I'll be very thankful." "But there's nothing in..." Rosemary spun round, pointing him inside, and returned to her desk. Apparently, the conversation was over. Slightly annoyed, though not daring to show it, Daniel returned to his office and saw that the box had been rewrapped. Closing the door quietly behind him, he had another look at the package. It was simply a normal cardboard box with a postage tag on the top. It was addressed to him. Being hurt that the parcel was meant for him, but confounded by not being allowed to know what was supposed to be inside, he spent the next hour engaged in very lacklustre detective work. After the 60 minutes, he admitted defeat and gave up, ignoring the box. In defiance, he reciprocated the gesture. Annoyed at the cardboard nemesis comeback, he grunted with contempt and settled back to his in-tray. Around him in the morning continued its dull meander, weaving slowly until lunchtime when, as the clock struck 12, Daniel placed down his paperwork, made a point of snubbing the box's existence, and, without saying a word to the cardboard antagonist, left the office. Happy with the box's obviously regretful response, it remained deathly quiet with remorse throughout. He made his way happily to the mezzanine cafe. Having purchased his lunch, he sat at his usual seat next to the window, situated so he could look out at the world and dream. After 15 minutes, Daniel had eaten one sandwich, was halfway through the next, and was reading his magazine while fantasizing about being a rock star, when a shadow passed over the open page. With growing dread, he became aware of the rest of the table filling with people. "Oh, crap," he whispered. It was the young managers, the suits, the go-getting types that Daniel had once aspired to becoming. They now filled his vision with great, big, mocking smiles that mingled with looks of amusement. "Oh, crap," Daniel repeated. There he was, the worst of them all, worse than a bout of gout, more awful than a dose of something requiring penicillin. The suit called Donald Smith Peterson, and now he was sitting opposite Daniel. "Crap, crap, crap," Daniel mouthed. It was Smith Peterson, the gangly, smarmy, and best friend with his brother, Harry, Suit. The man, no, corrected Daniel, the git before him told his brother and his brother's wife, Debbie, all of his problems at work. Behind Daniel's back, Smith Peterson would mock his continued lack of responsibility and ridicule how Rosemary did his work while Daniel got the coffee. To make matters worse, when Aradia had left him, Smith Peterson had used his sorrow to create jokes for his pack to snack upon, and Daniel had been forced to helplessly watch his life being devoured by the suited hyenas. Worst of all, Smith Peterson would pass on all the morsels of delicious information to his brother Harry and Harry's wife Debbie, who loved the gossip. Afterwards, on the rare occasion he visited Harry and Debbie, he would sit quietly on the sofa as he asked how work was going, with no smiles upon their smug faces and barely considerable laughter in their throats. As a result, Daniel hadn't visited them for 2 months and knew it would be several more before he did. How he despised the blonde, floppy-haired bully before him. "How's my best mate Daniel doing?" Donald brushed back his locks and smirked. "Made any world-shattering decisions lately?" "Made any decisions at all? No. Oh, wait a minute, chaps. He has chosen a sandwich." Donald smiled at him as giggles started to emanate from those around him. Daniel knew he wasn't finished and waited for the punchline. "Oh no, wait a minute. The beautiful Rosemary probably picked that for him." Laughter filled the table, the suits eager to display their loyalty to the leader of the pack. Daniel answered Smith Peterson so all those around the table could hear. "Listen, if you fancy Rosemary, I could have a few words, maybe sort you out on a date." The laughter died awkwardly, and Daniel signalled for Donald to draw close, speaking quietly, but not so quietly that the hyenas couldn't hear. "But between you and me, I think she's probably out of your league. How about Cruella over there?" He indicated a sour-faced woman named Frischella, who wore a dark blue suit and stood among the rest of Smith Peterson's group. She had expectation in her eyes and was glancing nervously down at the floor. She always seems to sit next to you. Maybe something in that. You never know. The smile disappeared on Smith Peterson's face. Oh yeah, well, you fancy Frischella, more than I ever could. Daniel beamed and spoke out loud, his false discretion tossed aside. Now, Donald, we both know Cruella has eyes for you alone. No, I must allow the better man to have the spoils of the great pigeon-chested Cruella. She's all yours, Donald. Enjoy. Nervous giggles from the suits were met with a look of anger from Donald. Beside him, Frischella's hopeful features had morphed into disappointment and anger. Smith! All heads turned and silence descended upon the scene. There at the end of the table stood Mr. Pinkbody, head of department. He towered over all like the Grim Reaper. Have you got that report I asked you for yesterday? He growled at Donald. Daniel was delighted to see the bully whiten, spill fruit juice down his shirt and stammer a reply. Right away, Mr. Pinkbody, sir. I'll get it now then, shall I? Donald was brushing at the juice, and a patch of yellow mixed with orange specks spread across his white shirt and silk tie. Daniel sniggered, loud enough to be heard by Donald, though not so loud to be heard by Mr. Pinkbody. He received a look of total malevolence from the bully before he hurried away. But the Grim Reaper didn't follow its victim. Instead, it turned its sights to Daniel. Aren't you lot supposed to be back at work as well? I believe lunch finished 1 minute ago. Everyone stood to leave as Daniel did the same. But on standing up, Daniel's left foot clipped the chair next to him, sending him reeling backwards, his coffee cup shooting forward as he sought to arrest his fall. Coming to a halt against the chair, he looked down to see the coffee spread an increasingly hot stain across his shirt and trousers. Unfortunately, it was doing the same over the trousers and the shoes of a reddening Mr. Pinkbody. Oh, crap. Sorry. Daniel added the apology pathetically and received a look of pure loathing from the head of department, who was brushing scalding hot coffee away from his crotch. Daniel imagined a scythe descending upon him. Get out of here before you do any more damage. Donald's hyenas smirked at Daniel, and he knew they would report back quickly to the pack leader, who in turn would tell Debbie and Harry. Crap. Disheartened, Daniel returned to his office to sit out the afternoon signing memos and sorting out the next batch of confused managerial trainees. He sat at his desk and daydreamed of a life where he did not spill scalding hot drinks on his boss's crotch, one without the bully Donald Smith Peterson, without rude, aggressive cardboard boxes. Leaving the offices of Global Management Inc. at 5, he returned to his car. Click, clunk, wallet removed, and autopilot engaged. 2 men sat up at the back of the car nearby. In an adjacent tree, a king cobra stretched its jaws, flicked out its tongue, and tasted the scent of its next intended victim. Daniel, oblivious to the predator or the watchers in the dark saloon by the car park exit, engaged his autopilot and set off home, where he arrived without memory of the short commute. Shaking off the last tendrils of work, he remembered with some joy it was a quiz night at the Dog and Duck, and, after entering his apartment, he passed the time eating microwavable pasta and wondering what his lost Aradia was up to. On the mantelpiece, the clock slowly wound forward to 7:30, and Daniel got up, his excitement rising with the anticipation of leaving his drab living space and the change of scenery it afforded him, always making him hopeful that something fascinating might happen. Unbeknownst to Daniel, the train, as well as being bloody big, had a sodding grey headlight, and it was now dazzlingly bright. Daniel pushed back his hair from his eyes and smiled at the old building, resplendent in all its 60s concrete and brick glory that housed the Dog and Duck. The building's previous life as a working men's club was easily discernible. Shaking his head, he smiled ruefully at the concrete monstrosity. Greeting him were 2 large white-paned windows set in a red brick and grey concrete mix. The windows seemed to say hello with a facade that was as friendly as a kick in the head. Hanging inside the warped frames, tobacco-stained lace curtains dangled limply from the moth-eaten velvet drapes. These dishevelled sets of curtains and drapes hid the outside world from the clientele of the run-down establishment. Staring at the decrepit building, Daniel just could not fathom out how the Dog and Duck had survived and changed with its 60s era's decor. He shook his head and thought about how his friends from university wouldn't have been seen dead in a place like the Dog and Duck, preferring instead the trendy wine bars downtown. Smiling at the aged structure, he brushed back his hair, opened the door, and was greeted by the smell of stale beer and musty carpet. "Hello, Danny!" Waving at him from the bar was Frank, a badly dressed 40-something, balding and extremely overweight plumber. Frank had an answer for everything wrong in the world, except for those things concerned with his own life. Frank attributed the glitches in his own life to the work of others and the bad luck life had dealt him. Frank had befriended Daniel on the first night he'd gone to the pub. The plumber had heartened the bedraggled dropout who'd arrived in a heap after leaving the university suddenly. Frank had also been the first to greet him after his first day at work. To Daniel, it seemed that Frank was always there watching out for him, and he smiled as he made his way across the ripped carpet towards the huge plumber, the rotund and unasked for protector. He patted him on the shoulder and smiled. He noticed silently that he liked Frank. To put it simply, the plumber's life made his own look more appealing. "Hello, Dwanny." Sitting next to Frank was a man who Daniel simply referred to as Mate. Mate spoke with what Daniel assumed to be a broad West Country accent, was in his late 50s, had a mass of unruly dark hair sprouting out of his wrinkled head, and always wore the same check suit. It was a suit that had been repaired countless times over the year. Mate always sat in the same bar stool, and the landlord just replenished his glass whenever it was empty and without question. Of course, Daniel had kept on meaning to ask Mate his name, but it had been 3 years now, and Daniel thought it would be rude, if not a little embarrassing, for him to admit that he had absolutely no idea what Mate's name was. Even if he did ask, he assumed he'd decipher the answer as well he had the first time, and end up calling him Mate anyway. "Hello, Daniel. What are you drinking? The usual." He looked across to see the landlord Peter standing behind the bar. With a huge beer gut flowing over a stained apron, Peter was an old-fashioned type who liked his real ale and took pride that he was not affiliated with any brewery. He had told Daniel that this meant he could pick the ale of the moment, the very latest trend. Yet Peter had not changed his cask ale in 10 years, and only then because the brewery had gone out of business. Unfortunately, he seemed to have cleaned the pipes even less frequently than he changed the breweries. Waving beside Peter was his wife, a large-set and happy woman called Marjorie. Daniel gawped at the large lady smiling back at him and tried to take his eyes off her attire. He couldn't. She had a dress sense more dated than the pub's decor, and it combined all the eras of the pub's history, and likely someone else's history, and someone else Daniel couldn't figure out. "She looks like a drunk, crazy blind dog dressed her, doesn't she?" whispered Frank into his ear. Daniel pushed back the laughter and ignored Frank. "Hello, Marjorie. Hello, Peter. Always good to see your friendly faces. Yeah, the usual will be great." Daniel waved after his usual greeting and turned to his friends. "Hello, Frank. Thanks for that. You nearly had me laughing out loud. Hello, mate. How's it going?" Mate mumbled a reply and smiled as Daniel nodded sagely and patted him on the shoulder. Quiz night at the Dog and Duck every Wednesday was one of 2 nights he spent out on the town. The second was at exactly the same location and consisted of exactly the same conversation, but didn't have a quiz and was on a Sunday night. "So I see global warming is worse than originally thought." Frank had opened the conversation and Daniel diligently responded. "Really? Some people think it's just a natural event that the earth goes through every now and then." Daniel liked playing the devil's advocate and loved to wind the old plumber up. "Oh yeah? Which people? You, perhaps?" "Don't believe all the brilliant scientists, Daniel. You figured it all out and you know best, huh?" The questions were asked in quick succession, and Daniel had no time to think of answers. No, not me, Frank. I believe them all right. Just some people at work." Daniel trailed off pitifully, and he could see that Frank was not in a playful mood. "Oh, so you believe it all, do you? You know about the looming global tragedy brought about by man's greed?" Daniel weakly nodded his agreement. "So what are you doing about it, Daniel?" "Me? What can I do?"
It's not as if I'm a politician or someone of importance, is it? Oh, but you've changed your light bulbs into those energy-saving ones. You used the bike to get to work and switched off the TV. You didn't leave it on standby then? Frank asked the last question knowingly, a smirk forming on his fat face. Something had really begun to irk Frank in the past month, and Daniel did not have a clue what it was. But whatever it was, the uni dropout was beginning to feel he was to blame. He hated it when Frank got on his high horse and picked on him. He almost believed that Frank thought it was up to him, Daniel Howard, to do something about the world's problems. Blushing, with just a little anger gripping him, he tried to fake the reply. Oh, sure, I've done all that. Never leave the TV on standby. I always think of energy saving and stuff like that. Daniel had responded defensively, and the glow in his cheeks had turned deep crimson when he remembered he'd left both the TV and the lights on. Crap, he hadn't owned a bike in years. Seems like everybody thinks of themselves and no one else these days. Man just wants to ruin the planet, and I don't see why we don't just let him. Maybe we should help him along and get it all over and done with. Frank trailed off and took a deep swig of his pint while he eyed Daniel, awaiting his response. I need the bathroom. Daniel made the excuse in order to leave the conversation, his anger and his embarrassment rising in equal measure. He felt uncomfortable when Frank got all depressed and talked about the end of the world. He also got angry when the plumber stated how mankind, and in particular Daniel, were doing nothing about it. On his return from the bathroom, the topic had changed and Daniel allowed Frank and mate to chat away uninterrupted. He jumped as a squeal from the loudspeaker filled the pub and stopped the conversation. The quiz has started. Peter, the landlord, spoke into the old microphone and began calling out questions with evident glee. Daniel, Frank and mate quickly huddled over their answer sheet. Carefully they concealed their scribblings. Daniel knew no one was stupid enough to believe their team might have a correct response. The rest of the pub had named them the dense duo and an idiot. Daniel had a feeling he was the idiot. Settling back onto his bar stool and bored of attempting to contribute his own answers, which were always wrong, Daniel passed the time glancing around the room. He peered at the same old faces belonging to the same old teams, smiled at people huddled within groups of 3 or 4 debating questions, and who mocked teammates who came up with daft or wrong answers. He glanced right towards the pool table surrounded by several teenagers, barely 18, if indeed they were, playing the game oblivious to the quiz night happening around them. Further away, on the other side of the bar, 2 men in their mid-40s, one tall, the other short and podgy and dressed in suits, sat in deep conversation. Daniel assumed they were discussing work or the latest snowboarding holiday. Behind them, in the deep recess, an old veteran with medals on his jacket sat and drank his beer alone, no doubt remembering companions long gone when the estate transformed from terraced houses into trendy apartments. Daniel paused, feeling eyes upon him. He glanced back towards the 2 men in their 40s. They were eyeing him with curiosity etched upon their faces. Holding their gaze questioningly, he was surprised by how quickly they turned away, the darkness of the bar concealing their features. He continued to watch as 2 men swiftly finished their drinks and left the bar. They looked back over their shoulders once and then closed the door behind them. Frank and mate had also been watching the departed men, and concern was now visible on their faces. Daniel coughed, and both of his friends turned with innocent smiles. They shrugged by way of explanation and continued the quiz. Yet this explanatory gesture did not reassure Daniel. A sharp chill shot through his body and up his spine, making the hair stand up on the back of his neck. What happened next really didn't help. That's the end of chapter 2. Hope you enjoyed it. Stand by for chapter 3.